Hey all, I'm WebCamParrot, and today I wanted to go over the insanely powerful Mordru. I'll be going over his best feats and abilities, as well as the general story surrounding the character. I usually reserve the absurd powers of titles for characters with a truly outrageous number of different abilities, and no character really embodies that more than Mordru. Seriously, Mordru just busts out new powers like no one else, especially in his pre-crisis appearances. I've actually had to change the way I visually represent pages for this video because of just how ridiculous Mordru can be. For instance, let's look at this scan here of Pre-Crisis Mordru. This is one page. Let's count the number of different new abilities Mordru displayed here. Well, firstly, he was able to summon his entire army from 1,000 years in the future across the galaxy to Smallville. That's one. Then he also seals the time travel lanes, preventing anyone from travelling to or from the current time period. That's 2. He seals Smallville under a force field dome. That's 3. And then he calls down lightning to separate Smallville from the Earth, so that on the next page he can levitate Smallville into the air. That's 4. On this one page, Mordru used 4 different abilities he had never used before. This page only has 3 panels on it. He literally used more unique abilities than there are panels on the page. This is hardly unusual for Mordru either. Nearly every page in these older pre-crisis comics has Mordru doing things similar to this, and the more modern Mordru appearances even make pre-crisis look like fodder, as you would have seen in the thumbnail. So if the formatting for this video is different, that's why. Mordru is often called the nastiest or most dangerous of the Legion of Superheroes enemies, and it's easy to see why. In his very first appearance, Pre-Crisis Mordru was straight up said to be stronger than the entire Legion of Superheroes, including Superboy, and was called the Master of the Ultimate Mystic Powers. He was capable of jamming the guns of an entire fleet of spaceships without any issues. The Legion of Superheroes were entirely unable to hurt Mordru whatsoever, and he displayed the ability to change his size and form at will. With only a fraction of his power, Mordru numbed the minds of the Legion, with Cosmic Boy stating that Mordru cannot be killed by any means known. They did eventually defeat Mordru using a weakness of his that I will go over later. Pre-Crisis Mordru would go on to cast an illusion over all of Smallville, and was able to travel 1,000 years in the past to find the Legion of Superheroes after searching through time and space for them with his magic. He could cast spells that would turn another into a spy for him, and was able to read the minds of everyone in Smallville. On one occasion, Mordru would capture the Legion, where he would then teleport them to a courtroom he created, trapping them in magical bonds they couldn't escape from. The jury was of course under his control, and were actually previously other sorcerers from his home planet, Sorcery World, that he had stolen the magic from, using their own powers to strengthen himself. Pre-Crisis Mordru can erase people from existence with a simple blast, and then casually power-null the Legion, whilst also creating a force field which they could not escape from. His power was stated to be capable of moving worlds, blackening suns, and annihilating galaxies. He created a safe that trapped Superman within it, and mind-hexed him to prevent him from escaping. It would also instantly mind-hex and trap anyone strong enough to break him out of it. In a particularly bizarre appearance, Mordru created a clone of Cosmic Boy to fool Superboy and the Legion. It was not only equal in strength to Cosmic Boy, but had all of his memories and powers. Mordru is so casually beyond basically every hero in Pre-Crisis that it's hard to get across just how wildly powerful he is, but one particular storyline outlined it well. It starts with a weakened Mordru still recovering from a rebellion on his home planet of Sorcerer's World. He created a giant immeasurable speed hand that easily blitzed the entire Justice League and the Justice Society of America at the same time, including the likes of The Flash, Superman, Alan Scott, and Dr. Fate. It would then drag them 1,000 years through time to the future. He then easily traps and seals the entire Justice League and JSA, with only Dr. Fate escaping his spell. Dr. Fate tries to square up to Mordru directly, only for this weakened Mordru to then say that an entire planet of sorcerers on Dr. Fate's level was not enough to fully defeat him in the past. Even if we seriously lowball the population of Sorcerer's World to the millions, that still means that millions of Dr. Fates together would only be a match for Mordru. He would then use the Golden Globe of Transcala, a sealing spell more powerful than the spells he cast previously, stating that no living being has ever escaped from it. The Legion of Superheroes would later turn up, only for this weakened Mordru to easily one-shot all of them with only half of his power. Mordru displayed telepathy and could read the minds of others, and was capable into looking into other universes and dimensions with his magic. As a being beyond death, Mordru lacks a true physical form, existing only as an astral body, and can even manipulate gravity strong enough to pin heroes like Superboy to the floor. In another storyline, he disguised himself as a leader of the Dark Circle, and displayed an extremely powerful level of adaptation. Incredibly bright and blinding night was used to affect Mordru's eyesight, forcing Mordru to then heal himself. And when the same tactic was used on him later, Mordru would heal instantly from the effects instead. The same thing won't work on Mordru twice. In this same storyline, he took over the entire Dark Circle by directly manipulating the atoms in their bodies, and searched through the minds of the entire population of Earth, giving every single one a command they were forced to follow. In other stories, he would use an alter ego known as Romder, who was capable of creating a magical artifact that essentially operated as an intangible monster made of mist that the Legion of Superheroes struggled to fight. Romder would also use magical lightning stated to affect one's immortal soul. Romder would eventually reveal himself as Mordru by creating a body out of the stonework of the castle, again trapping the Legion within a mystic sphere. Mordru has the power to bind an entire universe, and a possible future Mordru was shown creating a host of demons to hunt down his enemies. Even sorcerers more powerful than Mordru have been defeated by him, like the White Witch, who was severely aged, corrupted, and possessed by him. Mordru would of course grow to be far stronger than her in the future, but at this time the White Witch was more powerful than her. Now this is where stuff gets weird, because of continuity nonsense, as this same Mordru would also show up in Final Crisis. He would be shown casually overpowering Ron Vidar, calling his ring an irrelevant relic, and claimed to be capable of performing an incantation with Vidar's stomach lining and teeth that would remove the willpower from the rest of the Legion of Superheroes. This same Ron Vidar was able to create constructs that an anti-monitor suit amped Superboy was struggling to break through after we just saw Mordru easily deal with them and called his ring an irrelevant relic. Superboy Prime also laughed off an attack from Mordru in this comic, but that was thanks to his resistance to magic, not because he was stronger than Mordru. As you can clearly see, he's not stronger than Mordru. In this same comic, he was shown reviving those he had killed in the past to fight for him as animated minions, and White Witch considered the rest of the Legion of Supervillains an irrelevant threat compared to this Mordru. He also used some strange shadow-based magic to turn the shadows themselves into attacks. Most impressively, however, he would absorb the powers of kinetics, who wielded an entire universe worth of magic, leading Mordru to gain the magical ability of all of Earth 247. The White Witch would go on to absorb Mordru, which would corrupt her, turning her into the Black Witch. This would effectively be the last time we ever saw this version of Mordru. So just to reflect quickly, this being, who is as strong as millions of Dr. Fates, and was able to absorb the magical power of an entire universe, his big, ultimate weakness is being buried in the dirt. Yes, Mordru's powers do not work if he is buried in the literal dirt. Initially, the explanation for this was that being rendered suddenly without air would send Mordru into a defensive coma, which he would wake from as soon as some air got to him again. But this is contradicted pretty heavily later, and seems to be either a weakness that he lost or got changed and retconned into something else. For instance, we see a trapped Mordru here, clearly not in a coma, creating these red crystals that would make anyone who looks upon them uncontrollably hate Superboy. Impressively, the magic of these crystals lasted 1,000 years to affect a member of the Legion in the 30th century. It seems as if this weakness would later be changed to a general fear of imprisonment. Because Mordru was immortal, he had been imprisoned so many times that he now fears it greatly and becomes weakened whenever things like sealing are used against him. In fact, Mordru over his entire publication, not just Pre Crisis, everything, has only ever been defeated by some kind of sealing or absorption, with the exception of one instance where a clone of Orion drained Mordru of his magical ability temporarily. Now, we would see a similar version of this Pre-Crisis Mordru again in a timeline that is usually referred to as Glorithverse. This is because the Pre-Crisis timeline was initially created by Time Trapper, who greatly feared Mordru and wanted to stop him. Time Trapper would alter the timeline so that the Legion of Superheroes existed to fight and defeat Mordru. However, Time Trapper would eventually be defeated, and Glorith would replace him, effectively making everything Time Trapper did in the timeline a result of Glorith instead, hence Glorithverse. It is worth noting that this Glorithverse Mordru is weaker than his past self at first, but is still a force to be reckoned with. In this new timeline, Mordru was the only one capable of seeing and remembering the past timeline that existed before Time Trapper, and subsequently Glorith changed events. Here, he would display the ability to instinctively know if anyone had read his mind, and that he had a mind so cold and full of hatred that it was difficult to even read in the first place. After regaining some of his old power, he would resurrect armies of the undead from across the universe to fight for him. These undead minions were extremely difficult to deal with, as not only did they have the same abilities that they had during life, but they would also grow stronger over time and would eventually become eternal and unconquerable. Glorithverse Mordru was also able to cast a spell that would allow him to hear the words his enemies spoke to each other, allowing him to plan for their tactics in advance. Later, Mordru would actually team up with his former enemy Glorith, where he would absorb the entire Council of Wizards on Sorcerer's Planet, regaining the strength that he once had. He would then use these powers to de-age himself and create an amulet that would boost Glorith's own time-based powers. He also summoned some elementals, but they didn't really do anything impressive. The big moment in this storyline is when Mordru summons Infinite Man, the embodiment of the time stream and outerversal realm, and a being who is the manifestation of time across the entire multiverse. Infinite Man has been shown capable of easily dealing with the likes of Time Trapper in the past, so he's definitely powerful. Glorith and Mordru would then casually absorb Infinite Man, splitting his power between them, with it being stated that they had total power over space and time. Eventually, Mordru would gain all of Infinite Man's powers, and he would just ascend to this new state of being, his essence now too vast for the universe to hold. This is just where the storyline ends, as 0 Hour would erase all of the Pre-Crisis timelines, but I believe that this ascended Mordru would then go on to appear in Post-Crisis. I say this because the level of power that Mordru shows from here on in is way beyond anything he was capable of before, despite it being stated that this is the same Mordru. In fact, some of the feats that he performs from Post-Crisis and up to Rebirth are even beyond anything I would have expected him to have. To further back this up, Mordru is now stated to have no beginning and no end. He was never born and will never die, which would make a ton of sense for someone who just absorbed the embodiment of all of time. Mordru from here on would be known as a Lord of Chaos, but I will quickly add that he was far more powerful than any of the other Lords of Chaos or Order, and was frequently distanced from them, seeming to be treated more as some kind of cosmic constant than just a powerful being of magic. This was most clearly displayed in Amethyst, where Rin, a normal denizen of Gemworld, would take on the mantle of Mordru in much the same way that Uaxis took on the role of Darkseid. Although, as you'll quickly find out, Mordru is capable of things far greater than anything Darkseid has ever accomplished. In this Amethyst storyline, Rin was unfamiliar with these powers and was not fully Mordru yet, so his feats are limited, but he did show the ability to drain the life force from Gemworld. In this limited capacity, he would also show the ability to resist sleeping gas. From here, Mordru would go on to hunt down several Lords of Order and Chaos, absorbing their power for his own, including Kestrel, Greyman, and even Kid Eternity. Kid Eternity has the power to create dead, mythic, and heroic characters to fight for him, and even his version of Hal Jordan wasn't enough to stop Mordru from absorbing him and obtaining his powers. He would go on to easily defeat the entire post-crisis JSA and casually one-shot Scarab. He regenerated his hand and was able to completely disable Alan Scott by creating a vibration in his inner ear, ruining his concentration. Wonder Woman and the Flash were dealt with by teleporting them so far away that even someone as fast as Jay Garrick, even given literally an eternity and a day, would never be able to make his way back to him. This same Mordru blitzed Starman, smacking him with his own cosmic rod, and outgrew Atom Smasher, casually kicking him away like a football. He turned Alan Scott into wood, and Hawkgirl and Black Canary into birds with a simple gesture, as well as turning Atom Smasher and Sandman into stone. Nabu would be forced to intervene, only to have his powers absorbed by Mordru. The JSA would eventually defeat the Lord of Chaos, utilizing his weakness to Sealing, however, locking him away in the Amulet of Nabu. But all of that is pretty low end and boring. Let's talk about the really OP stuff. After freeing himself from the amulet, Mordru would rip the soul out of the new god Arion, sealing him away and stealing his body for his own. Now Arion is insanely powerful, so powerful that he was able to defeat the Dark World itself, a realm that was recently revealed to be the Great Darkness. Yes, that's the same Great Darkness that the Presence could never hope to defeat. More on that later. Now this might sound like an absolutely crazy high end for Mordru, but as you'll quickly see, this is nothing, and there is quite a lot to suggest that Mordru is on this level. For one thing, in this same comic line, Mordru would be directly referred to as the coming of the Great Darkness, and that his dread wings would spread over creation. Nabu himself expressed a direct concern and said that the fate of all creation hung in the balance as a result. Mordru would further go on to possess Hector Hall, obtaining both his powers and the powers granted by becoming Dr. Fate. He would one-shot Alan Scott, stealing the Starheart and using its powers for himself. Now, Alan Scott can't use the Starheart properly, but when wielded correctly it is immensely powerful, with it being stated that Eclipso was stronger than he had ever been before whilst utilising it, which would include things like Eclipso Spectre. This absurdly powerful Mordru would go on to smack the JSA, attempting to bring about an age of chaos and darkness utilising the Shadowlands, another name for the Great Darkness. Arion's soul would be unleashed by Power Girl and would arrive to resist Mordru with all his power. He would lose the Starheart, and even then, Thunderbolt, one of the strongest 5th dimensional imps, and is a fusion of two different imps at that, with power that rivals Nixie, was only able to trap him for a few moments using all of his power, and this was despite Mordru being weak to Sealing. Dr. Fate would come back to reclaim his powers, leaving a Mordru who had just been weakened by a beyond presence level sorcerer and a 5th dimensional imp, and even still, an all-out Nabu amped Hector Hall was shown unable to deal with him, with Mordru calling him nothing, saying he was only a lowly agent of order. Nabu would be forced to call upon the wizard Shazam and the Rock of Eternity for aid, with them all using their combined powers to unleash Mordru's greatest weakness against him. They would seal Mordru away inside the Rock of Eternity, claiming he would stay there until the universe died and time itself ended. Naturally, Mordru was free about 2 weeks later, but first, he would tank and absorb a full power attack from the wizard Shazam like it was nothing, leaving him to his fate against the Spectre. What I'm going to say next kind of plays heavily into my theory that Mordru is far more than a Lord of Chaos, and is often not even counted amongst their number because of this. Despite Mordru clearly being alive, the Spectre would claim that all of the Lords of Order and Chaos were dead. Even more bizarrely, Nabu would then say he was the strongest from amongst the Lords of Chaos and Order anyway, despite literally getting his ass smashed by Mordru in his last appearance. In a much later appearance, Mordru would even directly say that he was the only true Lord of Chaos, along with the fact that he has no beginning and no end, despite the rest of the Lords of Order and Chaos clearly having a beginning, tells me that he just really is not one of them, that he's in a higher tier. Mordru would survive the 9th Age of Magic, entering the 10th completely unharmed and unchanged, despite every other Lord of Order and Chaos literally dying. During this age, Mordru would again possess Dr. Fate, with its host Kent Nelson saying that the way he used his powers was beyond anything any of the Fates could have ever achieved. He would also call Zatara a speck, teleporting him away with a gesture, but wouldn't get to do much else before New 52 started. I'll just briefly mention Earth 3 Mordru, who took a part of Volthoom's soul and attached it to his power ring, beginning the first few steps towards the creation of the Ring of Volthoom, and was powerful enough to scare Volthoom into leaving. This one panel is actually the only appearance he has though, so not super exciting. New 52 and following into Rebirth would show us some of Mordru's past, as well as his most impressive feats and statements yet. In these storylines, Mordru would be shown foretelling the future by channeling his magic through a baby, which would also ultimately erase it. Mordru has this weird narrative thing with killing babies, I don't know what it is. He can scry things from a great distance away, and was able to summon a bunch of dragons. Mordru stated that he was capable of creating an entirely new identity for somebody else. He was also able to hoodwink and trap Etrigan with his powers, probe Hell using his mind, teleport Etrigan to Hell, and place a tracking spell on him to ensure he would be able to follow him wherever in Hell he went. Mordru would go on to call himself the strongest sorcerer of this century or any century. An amped Madame Xanadu would disagree, but then she would get smacked by Mordru using a spell called Mind Rip. This statement would include the mighty wizard Merlin. Mordru has often been considered a rival of Merlin in New 52, if not straight up more powerful than him. Merlin has used his powers to grow large enough to hold all of space and time in his hands, and the combined might of Hell, Lucifer included, wasn't enough to damage his magic-protected body. It's possible that the Lucifer in this comic isn't the Lucifer Morningstar we are more familiar with, but there really isn't anything to suggest that this isn't simply Lucifer before the events of Sandman, considering this all happened in the past. Especially since Hell should not have been affected by any of the Crisis events between now and then. Additionally, there is a lot of evidence for Mordru being on this level, like the Aryan scaling I mentioned earlier, and Mordru's comparison to the Great Darkness. In order to explain more of this scaling, I'll have to go over a number of events currently taking place in Justice League Dark. There is a force outside of creation known as the Other Kind. They are repeatedly said to be a direct manifestation of the Great Darkness, which, as we already know thanks to Swamp Thing, is a force that rivals the Presence. One quote states that the darkness awakens, the eyes of the Other Kind have turned upon reality. Constantine would even imply that the Other Kind were a far graver threat than the first time the Great Darkness showed up, and he was literally there trying to fight it when that happened. Zatanna would also directly say that this was the same darkness rearing its ugly head again. Although, again, this is probably downplay for the Other Kind, as during the events of Justice League Dark, Heaven and Hell would find it necessary to try and make an alliance to combat them, despite Etrigan clearly stating that the Presence was in Heaven at the time. indicating that the other kind are simply too much for the Presence to deal with on his own. The Upside Down Man is only one member of the other kind, and despite this, he is said to be powerful enough to make Lucifer himself cower. He's also considered the equal and opposite of Hecate. And yes, I did see all of your comments about the way I said Hecate, which is apparently wrong, so my bad. Hecate would seal her opposite, the Upside Down Man, away, and with no one to challenge her, she was considered unstoppable. In order to limit her power, Eclipso would be created to drain and negate her magic. Not to say that Eclipso is this powerful, but he's basically her kryptonite. Who created Eclipso, the original Wrath of God, again? That's right, the Presence did. The Presence was forced to use Hecate's kryptonite because she was too powerful for him and was considered unstoppable. Constantine would also state that a witch-marked Wonder Woman with only 3/5 of Hecate's power was the strongest god to walk the earth as far as John knew, and he literally saw the Presence on Earth only a couple of months prior. Dr. Fate also made a similar statement about a Wonder Woman holding a portion of Hecate's power, saying she had more power than any god who had ever walked the earth flowing through her veins, which again includes the Presence. Hecate was also said to have direct power over the dreaming, which is the outside force responsible for shaping the Presence in the first place. I could go on with less obvious things like how Hecate was going to destroy the Red, which contains the body of God as we saw in Animal Man, but it should be pretty obviously concrete what I'm trying to say at this point, and I shouldn't have to go into details like that. I'm sure, despite the absolutely massive amount of evidence I have already presented, there are still going to be Presence and Lucifer fanboys out there who will whinge and complain about this. Like, this honestly requires its own video, but the Presence is definitely incredibly powerful, and yet he's far from being the top dog or anything close to it. In conclusion, the Upside Down Man, who is just one member of the other kind, is far stronger than the Presence. So when this entire race, with power well beyond the Presence, is beating down the door, and Constantine only has the opportunity to send one more message, what message does he choose to send? Find Mordru. Zatara also thought that Mordru was the only being in existence who would be capable of preventing the crisis that the other kind would bring. This would lead Zatanna and Wonder Woman to meet with Mordru. Wonder Woman would call him one of the most powerful dark magicians in existence, and Mordru would respond by saying one of was a disservice to his power. They try to refuse to sit with him, and Mordru says that he does not request, he commands, and the universe obeys, forcing them to sit. Mordru was the one responsible for torturing Hecate, eventually forcing her to give up her powers to the Lords of Order and Chaos. Zatanna says he should be afraid of the other kind, and Mordru states that they should fear him. Mordru would call himself the only true Lord of Chaos. Wonder Woman would ask him, if he's so sure, if he's so powerful, why doesn't he just take on this immensely powerful race, wielding power beyond God himself? And Mordru just says, because I don't want to. What a Chad. Mordru would then casually infuse enough power into a gem to rip the universe in half, universe in this context clearly referring to creation, and would tear a hole straight out of the comic book page to the Overvoid, telling them not to meet him again or he would eat them alive. The power he granted them was stated to be capable of breaking all of magic, and would later be used in this exact way to overpower the combined might of every Lord of Order, and would be a significant contributing metric in the sealing of Eclipso, Circe, and all of Hecate's power. When I started looking into Mordru for this video, I honestly did not expect to find feats as good as this. When I first started seeing this stuff, I was skeptical that he was going to be this powerful as well. but the evidence is just so overwhelming it can't be denied. Mordru is one of the most powerful beings in all of DC, period. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm working on videos for Blade and Starro right now, so look forward to those. And otherwise, I will see you all in the next one.